Hello, I'm Ian, and as you might have seen, I'm a firm believer in getting hold of second-hand woodworking tools rather than buying them new. In this tutorial, I hope to be able to convince you this is a pretty sensible, interesting and cost-effective approach to buying tools, and one that you might want to adopt too. At the end, I'll give you some suggestions on sourcing second-hand tools, including where you can pick them up for free. The first thing I have to say is that providing a second-hand tool isn't too rusty or broken or has missing parts, there are very few of them that can't be pretty easily restored to a condition where they'll work as well as they did when they were new. The second thing I have to say, and it might seem obvious, is that if a tool looks pretty, and many tools today are sold partly on looks, it doesn't make it work better. To illustrate my point, here are 3 No. 5 planes that I own that I enjoy using for different reasons. This is a No. 5 Stanley. I rescued that from my local recycling centre. It was covered in rust and I restored it. This is a top-of-the-range No. 5 plane made by one of the few remaining plane manufacturers, and it would cost you £300 to buy that today. And this is an amalgam of Stanley and record parts. It's much loved, but also much mended, and it's probably worth about 35 quid. Let's just see how each of those planes performs. First of all, the top of the range plane. Secondly, the hybrid of Stanley and record parts. And lastly, the plane I rescued from the recycling centre. And as you can see, if you have a look at the shavings, you wouldn't know which plane had cut what shaving. Because these 3 planes are based on the same Stanley Bailey design, they all work in more or less the same way, and so it's not surprising that they all produce similar results. The other key element is that they were all manufactured to precise, carefully measured tolerances, and each component was checked against exacting quality control standards. This can't be said of many similar planes being sold today, and we'll come back to that later. I'm not saying that this beautifully made, lovely to look at and lovely to handle tool made by one of the few remaining excellent hand tool manufacturers isn't a really desirable tool. Far from it. It's important we support these companies if we can afford to. It's just that in the case of these 3 well-made planes, it's the sharpness of the iron and not a lot else that makes it work properly. And the rest of the tool becomes something that is desirable rather than something that you need. Some of you will have found the opening to this video rather unsettling, particularly I guess if you've just bought a tool similar to that. And I'm afraid it's going to get more unsettling. If there was a fire in my workshop and I had to dash into the flames to save only one of these planes, I'd save this salvage restoration project rather than either of those 2. And no, it's not because I claim on my house insurance and simply buy another one of these beautiful planes. It's for 3 very good reasons. And these are the same 3 reasons you should consider getting hold of second-hand tools rather than buying them new. The first reason is that by getting hold of a second-hand woodworking tool that was made in the 1960s or before, you'll have a tool that is considerably better made than the same middle-range hand tool made today. The 1950s and 60s was a period when hand tools hadn't quite been superseded by power tools, and the market for them was people who either earned their living with them or, because of their technical education, people who had the knowledge to recognise a well-made tool from a poorly made one. This forced competing manufacturers to maintain the quality of their tools or lose market share to those that did. Exactly the same thing is happening with power tools today, which is why makes such as Bosch, Makita and DeWalt spend large amounts of money on research and development and maintain the quality of the tools they manufacture in order to maintain or improve their market share in a highly competitive field. As in the 1950s and 60s, a big slice of their market earns their living through their products, and so a company like Makita daren't allow the quality of their products to drop, or people will simply turn to a competitor's brand. Stanley, Record and Woden were the Makita, Bosch and DeWalt of the 50s, and they were in fierce competition, which is why hand tools made by them at this time or before are so good. Note I said at this time. So what is it about these tools that makes them so much better than the same tool made today? Well, firstly, the quality of the manufacturing processes used on them are often better. For example, the turning and knurling of the knurled adjustment nut on a hand plane. Secondly, the quality of the materials that were used in products. For example, beech or mahogany was used to make tool handles rather than high-density polythene that's used today. Thirdly, the quality of finish manufacturers applied to their products. For example, the accuracy and texture of ground surfaces applied to chisels or plane irons. Fourthly, the training and skill level of the workforce that made the tools. Manufacturers in that era ran apprenticeship schemes, and the workforce that made the tools were highly skilled and had a pride in the work that they were doing. And finally, the standard of quality control carried out during the manufacture of the tools. As I've said, each component was made to exacting tolerances, and if a component failed to meet the tolerance required, it was rejected. The standard of those 5 elements far outstrips the standards used on the same hand tools manufactured today. In fact, the quality of many woodworking hand tools on the market today is a dismal shadow of what it used to be. Even, I'm afraid, tools made by brands I've mentioned that used to be associated with quality products. I've lost count of the number of times people have asked me why they can't get their plane to work properly. And so often it's because the tool is so badly made it's an impossibility. Today, manufacturers can get away with making poor quality hand tools because a discerning market for them no longer exists. The same tools are sold on the basis of price and looks rather than quality. Tools are purely functional products, and the last thing we need to be thinking about when choosing one with limited cash in our pocket is what the tool looks like. Buying new hand tools today is a minefield because even within the same apparently reputable brand, you'll find tools that vary in quality from very good to dreadful across their product range. As we've seen already, the exception to all I've talked about so far are tools made by a small number of quality hand tool manufacturers such as Clifton, Pax, Dorchester, Sorby, Lee Nielsen, Veritas, etc. But as we saw earlier, these companies charge an appropriate price for the care they put into their products and the consequent strength of their brands. A second-hand tool of an appropriate age and make will provide you with a similar quality tool, one that does exactly the same job just as well for a small fraction of the price. Oh, and while I'm still in this arena, a new design for a tool made by one of these excellent manufacturers doesn't automatically make it a better tool than one of a traditional design that you can pick up second-hand. Let's move on, maybe hastily, to the second reason why you should source your tools second-hand rather than new. This is short, pretty straightforward, something the majority of us know to be true, and it's something we can now no longer ignore. By sourcing second-hand tools and not buying new, we are detaching ourselves from a destructive culture that sees almost anything new and shiny as having value, simply because it's new. The argument is simple. By buying a new product needlessly, we are using up irreplaceable materials and adding to carbon emissions that are destroying our planet. Things have reached a stage when you don't need to switch on your telly to see that this is true. You can just as easily look outside your front door. Having set that marker, in the case of some tools, there will be times when there's no alternative to buying a new product. There are 2 reasons this might be the case. Firstly, a second-hand one may be almost impossible to get hold of, or secondly, as in the case of chisels that have been overheated on a grinding wheel, the quality of that second-hand tool could have been compromised without it being obvious. It might be safer to buy a new product. The third reason for sourcing second-hand tools is more comfortable, cosy even, and is to do with the tool having a history. The tools I own that I enjoy using most are those that have possibly passed through 2 or 3 woodworkers' hands before they reach mine. Maybe a bit weirdly, I see myself as a sort of borrower rather than owner of the tool. I see my role in the tool's life as one of keeping it alive by using it, of keeping it well maintained, of repairing it if necessary, and finally of ensuring it's passed on to another woodworker once I no longer need it or can no longer use it. That way, the tool has a life with a longevity beyond my own and has a value that builds rather than diminishes. This is so different to the life of the average power drill, which is used for between 6 and 20 minutes in its entire life and then thrown away. So there are your 3 reasons for buying woodworking hand tools second hand. And having convinced you, I have convinced you, haven't I? We'll move into part 2 of this video where I'll give you some suggestions as to where you can buy them and secondly, where you can get them for free. Places where you are likely to find second-hand tools to buy are car boot sales, jumble sales, garage sales, second-hand shops, antique fairs, flea markets, and ordinary bric-a-brac stalls that you find in street markets. Charity shops sometimes have second-hand tools, but the bigger charities often don't, and this is because of the danger of their sharp cutting edges. eBay is the obvious place to look, but you've got to do your research first. Here are some tips. Buy it now prices for a given make and type of tool are a pretty good guide for what you should be paying, providing other eBayers have shown some interest. The interest other eBayers have shown in the tool you're after is quite important. If nobody else is interested in a buy it now tool you fancy and it isn't a new listing, it's probably not worth the price the seller's asking for it. And similarly, if it's an auction item and nobody else is interested, it's probably going to have something wrong with it. Before spending your hard-earned money on eBay, take some time to look at why some listings of the tool you're after are selling for higher prices than others. There are loads of possibilities, but here's a starter list. It could be the make of the tool. For example, for no real reason, Stanley tools generally fetch a slightly higher price than the same tool made by Record. It could be the tool comes with its original packaging, which makes it more collectible, but therefore not necessarily a good deal for you. It could be in particularly good condition or unusually for that tool have all its parts or cutters. And finally, it might be an old tool or a particularly collectible one. A tool having all its parts is usually desirable, and a tool that looks like a bargain may well be invitingly priced to take into account a missing or damaged component, so be careful. Before you buy or bid, look at loads of examples of the same tool and work out why eBayers are more interested in some listings than others. You can tell a lot about the seller and the tool you're interested in from the description of the tool, so it's well worth reading this really carefully. And finally, look out for silly postage costs. If you do get caught out on eBay and the description of the tool has not acknowledged the fault in the product, make use of eBay's dispute facility. It's worked really successfully for me in the past. Finally, here's where you might be able to get those second-hand tools for free. Relations, friends, work colleagues and neighbours, or maybe even their relations, may well be able to dig out tools they've finished with, or they've used, or they've found when they moved into their property, or maybe they've inherited tools from somebody and would like them to go to a good home. To show this isn't complete fantasy and give you some encouragement, here are 2 of many tools I've come by this way. This rather beaten up looking plane I inherited from my aunt. It's made by a company called Norris, who used to be seen as the Rolls-Royce of plane manufacturers. I had no idea of its value when I first got it, but I now know, even in its current condition, It's probably worth almost as much as a brand new Lee Nielsen iron smoothing plane, and as you can see, it works pretty much as well. This lovely old tri-square with its brass inlay and its brass face stock used to belong to a pattern maker living in Leeds in the 60s. He gave it with other lovely tools to a neighbour of mine, and he wanted them to find it a decent home. So I'm now the custodian of this lovely tool, and I even know whose it was because it's got his name stamped on the stock. So don't be shy about sharing your enthusiasm for old tools with anybody who's prepared to listen. Here are some other places you might pick up tools for free. Posting on neighbourhood Facebook groups or recycling schemes such as FreeCycle, and as I've mentioned, your local recycling centre may be a good place to look. It depends on how it's run, but my local one used to have a separate bin for old tools that provided me with several useful finds over the years. If there's no tool bin, a loitering look in the metal bin might throw up something useful. I found this plane that I showed you right at the beginning in the bin I just mentioned, and I took it home for free as it was seen by the centre as rusty old rubbish. To my surprise, it turned out to be a Stanley Bailey Type 7 hand plane manufactured between 1893 and 1899. I don't know what it's worth now, and it doesn't really matter. It's probably passed through many hands before mine, and I love it. So there we are. And I really hope what you've seen has made you see that sourcing quality old hand tools is a cost-effective and interesting alternative to buying them new. If you thought this video was useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see what I do next, don't forget to hit the subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner. Happy woodworking!